What if Deku had a lightning quirk? How would this impact the My Hero Academia storyline, and would things remain the same or change a lot? Well, stick around to the end of the video to find out. And also, before we do get started, I just quickly want to say to everybody watching this, if you enjoy the video, make sure to smash that like button, seeing as it helps a ton with the algorithm and it only takes 1 second. That said, the art for today's video was made by GXG, and you can find her link down below in the description for some dope MHA art. That said, I hope you guys go on to enjoy the video.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
We start with the birth of Izuku Midoriya, who just opened his eyes to reveal lightning sparks in his eyes. Everybody in the office would notice, and his quirk would have manifested straight from birth, with Izuku being one of the early victims to the quirk doomsday theory of quirks, being absurdly powerful from birth. This would lead to Izuku having a fairly different life, since now he's going to have to attend a hero training facility for the top quirks of his generation, many who grew up to be very popular heroes and powerful ones at that. Izuku ends up training a majority of his upbringing and practices a sword style he deems as Thunder Breath, which he learns himself, developing his own strange abilities and techniques that allow Izuku to move at supersonic speeds, teleport in an instant, and even manifest into lightning itself, much like an L from One Piece. That said, his training would be rough and would shape him into a totally different person, making Izuku more cocky and confident in what he does, and eventually Izuku would begin having a clear disdain for Bakugo, who always tried to make Izuku look bad any chance that he could possibly get, but Izuku would often ignore him. All Might in this version of events never ends up meeting Izuku here, since this time he never ends up taking the path where he runs into the sludge villain. Instead, we skip immediately to the UA entrance exam, seeing as Izuku's upbringing changes entirely from what we knew in canon. This would blow the expectations out of the water, and he is ranked number 1 in hero prospects for the future. Izuku shocks even Nezu, and much like expected, makes his way onto the scene easily at the recommendation exam. Uraraka, she ends up getting saved by Nezu, who powered off the robot before it could genuinely crush her. And when it comes to the first day, as soon as Izuku walked in, he was swarmed by all of his classmates who simply were excited to have somebody like him in their class. He is the number 1 hero prospect of their generation after all. Eventually, however, their sensei Aizawa would wake up and he would have forced them to all take the quirk apprehension test, which again, Izuku completely blows out of the water, and he has a definite interest of all of his classmates, who just so happen to be females. That said, Izuku would be looked at with envy by most of the boys, mostly Bakugo, since he always hated Izuku and for taking the limelight from him, quote unquote, even though he never even got to experience it due to the fact that Izuku was always so much better. That said, eventually after a couple of days, the Heroes vs Villains event would be scheduled to take place soon, and All Might would bust into the classroom to the apparent shock of the class, who is ecstatic by All Might's presence. That said, the pairing would run similar to canon, and Izuku would simply tell Uraraka he'll handle it. He would immediately, as soon as the match starts, teleport to the bomb room as Bakugo would be running down the hall screaming, "Deku!" He almost made his way to Uraraka before All Might would say over the intercom, "Hero team wins," shocking the both of them. And the class is greeted to a replay of what had just happened. Apparently, Izuku had simply blitzed Ida, who tried his best to beat Izuku using his super speed quirk, but using a technique developed by yours truly, he simply said, "Thunderclap and flash," and he cut down Ida in a flash and then touched the bomb, blowing the hair out of his face to the girl's amusement. That said, following this, Izuku would show off every single time that he could get the chance, and he would be the center of attention every time. Eventually, we find ourselves at the USJ event as Izuku just finished putting on the brakes on the Nomu, just decimating it with a lightning attack that destroyed it at a cellular level, leaving Shigaraki in absolute horror, as Kurogiri tried to save the young master and failed. Deku appears in front of Shigaraki in Shazam-like fashion and says, "I don't think so," before teleporting this man straight to Tartarus, and then eyeing down Kurogiri, who had been captured or at least held down by Bakugo and Kirishima. Eventually, the heroes would arrive for cleanup, and Izuku would be thanked for his efforts at the USJ, where this story would end up going viral in the media, and for the week off, Izuku would attend interview after interview, getting his clout up. That said, around this all the time, we would basically have just enough time for the sports festival, where Izuku ended up watching as Bakugo declared himself the winner. Many would have been quite what's the word I'm looking for? Like, people would have been like doubtful of that, I guess is just the word I'm going to use for it. And even after Bakugo declared himself the winner, he would literally find himself in third place by the end of it, with Izuku having used his insane speed for the race, leadership skills for the cavalry battle, as well as strength for the 1v1 battles that were complete washes. And when I say complete washes, I genuinely mean it. I could not use the word in a better way. Like seriously. This would eventually lead to the class ending up going back to UA Classroom, where everybody would end up picking their hero names. And Izuku's name would be Thunder God Zenitsu. Thunder God Enel. Yeah, I want to use his name because why not? That said, this is around the time where they all also have to pick their hero agencies. And one thing that actually would end up changing in this version of events is Izuku doesn't end up picking the people who you would probably expect him to pick. He actually ends up going off with Mirko. Why does he go off with Mirko? Because Deku he got the hots for Mirko. And that's as simple and blatant as I could possibly put it. This means that Ida never ends up having somebody to save him in the hero killer attack, and so he ends up essentially getting paralyzed, never being allowed to become a hero ever again for his own foolish actions. This would end up, of course, affecting UA in the media, because people begin to say that UA is incompetent, they didn't take care of their students, yada yada yada. You guys know how the media works. And that's essentially what would have happened to Izuku. The Nomu situation in Host of City would not have taken place, so that's kind of one good thing, but the bad thing is Ida still ends up getting hurt because, he goes off with Manuel and chases after the hero killer. By the way, around this same time, Tartarus would have also had a prison breakout due to the fact that Shigaraki's there. All for One's clearly not about to just leave his successor there to rot, so he ends up breaking him out earlier than he does in canon, which ends up taking us to the final exams arc that actually is held back by 2 more weeks due to the fact that UA was facing such horrendous things from the media. Eventually though, the final exams would happen and it would pretty much go all the way as it does in canon. Izuku would still be paired up with Bakugo to face All Might, but I'm not even gonna lie to you guys. Bakugo ends up telling Izuku to stay out of his way, and he would go off to face All Might, who would promptly decimate this man. Izuku would then teleport in front of him and tell All Might that he's sorry for this, but he's gonna have to put him down a couple of notches. All Might would smile before saying, "I would like to see you try, young Midoriya," before blitzing at him and throwing a punch. Except the punch never lands. In fact, it's almost as if he punched right through Izuku. All Might would be in utter shock, and Deku would teleport 2 feet behind the punch. This is when Izuku would say, "You're too slow," before blitzing up at All Might and landing about 100 hits that would send him crashing through 17 buildings. When All Might wakes up, he's literally in his Small Might form, and Recovery Girl has to rush to him to save him. And everybody who was watching this fight would be like, "Izuku just beat the #1 hero?" They go haywire. The Class 1A is just losing their minds. Which inevitably leads us to the Forest Training Camp arc. In the original, Shigaraki ends up kind of like chasing after Deku, putting him in that like lock where he puts his hand around his throat. But this doesn't happen in this version. So we're going to be skipping straight to the Forest Training Camp arc, where things relatively stay the same. I mean, the journey there is the same. Deku's interactions with Mineta, Koda, it's the same. And his training is not the same. What Deku's actually going to be doing for his training is essentially just working on more special moves. When it comes to his quirk, Izuku's all but mastered it. There's literally nothing that Izuku has left to learn. I mean, the man is an absolute legend, a beast. So we're going to be skipping to a really badass scene that I thought of like 2 minutes ago, and it wasn't even in the script, but I figured I'd throw it in. You guys remember when Izuku was talking to Koda, and Koda was like, "Get away!" This time, Izuku sits right next to Koda, and it's at this moment that he would begin talking to him for about 5 minutes, before the hero, or no, not hero, but villain, known as Muscular would appear from the corner and begin laughing, saying it's a 2-for-1 special. Izuku just stretches one arm behind Koda, and then shoots him with like 20 million volts of electricity, just completely taking out Muscular. There was no way he was about to survive that. And from here, Izuku just continued listening to Koda's story, telling him that he understands, before a huge explosion would go off in the forest, and Izuku would look to Koda before telling him that villains are attacking, turning to Muscular before saying, "Oh yeah, I took him out without you even noticing." With Koda be like, "What? Really?" He would look, and then from here he would be held by Izuku before then promptly being teleported straight next to Aizawa, who was fighting against the Dabi clone, who would promptly get taken out by Izuku. From here, he would go into the forest and begin essentially dismantling every single villain that we saw in the Heroes vs Villains invasion thing, including Tiger, Sniper, and Magma. He also ends up going after the hero, or no, not hero, but the villain that had like the teeth quirk and helps out Bakugo and Todoroki, and then he helps out Dupli Arms with Tokiyami's little problem. By blasting a bunch of electricity that created so much light, Tokiyami was able to control Dark Shadow, and finally, he ended up saving that one group from Class B from the gigantic Nomu that had like chainsaw arms and things like that. Momo never ends up actually getting her tracking chip on it, which is one bad thing, but another good thing would be that when Bakugo gets taken and Mr. Compress runs off and reveals to everybody that they took Bakugo, Izuku just sighs and says, "Do I really have to?" Before thinking back to what happened with Ida and thinking, yeah, if I don't do this, the media is going to be on our ass. So he ends up teleporting right next to Mr. Compress before punching him down at lightning speeds and sending Mr. Compress flying down to the ground before grabbing both of the orbs, and they would reveal to be nothing but compressed ice. From here, Mr. Compress would smile before throwing them over to Dabi's direction, and Dabi would enter the portal. Immediately, Deku would say, "Oh no, you don't!" as he blitzes straight into the portal right before it closes. It had literally like 2 inches before closing, and Deku, in like a bolt of lightning, just straight flew through it, leaving himself to be in the middle of all of the villains that were still present. And what Izuku would do is hold his hands out in a cross-like fashion before saying, "Die!" And like a huge like bolt of electricity would just surround the entire room, just shocking all of them into submission, until eventually a dark portal would appear in front of them. Oh, and yeah, I forgot to mention, Bakugo just so happened to be one of the people who got shocked, as well as Tokiyami, due to the fact that they never ended up saving him in this version. That said though, when All For One would end up arriving and, he ends up clapping, being like a classic villain, what ends up essentially happening in this version is when Izuku sees this, he's like, "So you're the big and bad behind all of this." He doesn't exactly know who All For One is or even what his quirk is. Izuku would look at him before asking, "So, what's your quirk? I assume you have to be pretty powerful." And All For One would say, "Quirk? I have quirks, young man," before he then proceeds to shoot a beam of tendrils right at Izuku's direction, which would go right through him. Keep in mind, they don't affect the boy whatsoever. And when he sees this, he's kind of shocked, like, "Wow, like you're just as strong as the news articles have been saying." Before then looking towards Midoriya and saying that he won't be putting up much of a fight because while he only has one powerful quirk, All For One has many. He would then begin to pretty much create a force field around himself, not allowing Izuku's lightning to hit him, and then begins charging up his gigantic fist that has like a bunch of quirks into them. He ends up rushing in at Izuku's direction, and Izuku would be like, "Nah, none of that," before punching his arm away so that the blast direction goes up into the sky and ends up essentially hurting nobody, and then sending All For One flying up into the air with an uppercut, before teleporting behind him and hitting him right back to the ground by clobbering him, and then landing on top of him, pretty much snapping his spine in half in Raiden fashion from Mortal Kombat. In case you guys have seen the X-ray move, that's essentially what he does. But yeah, after doing that, Izuku then looks to All For One as he grabs him by the mask and picks him up and tells him, "I'm the new big bad in town. All Might, that was the old days. You're looking at the new #1 hero," before smashing his head into the ground and then immediately calling authorities to take All For One into custody, as well as all of the other villains, and take Bakugo and Tokiyami back to the heroes' school. After doing so, Izuku would go around in popular media and people would begin calling him like genuinely the #1 hero, without even being one. All Might was able to actually retire early without even revealing his secret, and continued being a teacher at UA, where he didn't end up losing his time limit, so he was able to actually teach the class for the entire year, which does end up helping All Might in the long run. But I mean, he gets an entire year extra worth, so what real difference does that make? We then jump into the Provisional Hero License exam. I hate covering this arc, so I will blatantly just refuse. I mean, there's no stakes. It's just a bunch of students throwing balls at each other and then saving fake people who are in danger. I'm pretty sure you guys could guess how Izuku's gonna do in that section. So we're probably gonna be skipping to when the class meets the big three of UA, Mirio Togata, Tamaki, as well as Nejire Hado. They all go in the class and Mirio begins to do his normal explaining. Nejire just shows off her bubbly personality, and eventually Mirio ends up challenging the entirety of the classroom to fight him, telling them that they need to learn experience in a way of beating them all up and screaming power. After he does that, he blitzes towards Izuku's direction and begins trying to hit him like as much as he can. He tries his misdirection with poking the eyes, but every time that he tried to hit Izuku, nothing landed. Keep in mind, Mirio doesn't have one for all, just due to the fact that All Might still hasn't just given it away yet, and he's still thinking about Mirio, so Mirio isn't able to like even whip out some special extra quirks or anything like that, and so Izuku just stands there and Mirio's hits just go straight through him. Mirio would stop phasing and say, "Dude, your quirk? Overpowered." He would then promptly invite him to go to the Sernadai agency, which Izuku would accept, seeing as I see no reason for him not to, and when he's there, he would end up immediately being accepted by Sernadai, who would simply look into the future and realize that no matter what he does, Izuku gets that stamp every single time. He's way too fast for him, just like All Might was, and so they would end up having the situation where Deku and Mirio end up going on hero patrol. They run into the villain known as Overhaul, and Izuku's not about to let this slide, because him personally, he ain't gonna let that slide. So he ends up pretty much taking out the big bad villain of the entire series that was pretty much left, which was, Overhaul, and he does so with such ease that it's almost a joke to him. It's genuinely so easy for Izuku to take out like Overhaul. He just shoots lightning at him, and Overhaul didn't even have a second to react or to like touch him with his hand. So GG's to Overhaul, I guess. He gets thrown in jail and his entire organization essentially gets taken out overnight by the heroes, who end up bursting in and destroying everybody. This would end up leading to the next arc, which would essentially be the UA Sports Festival, or technically the Remedial Course arc, but that doesn't change. Izuku's not there, so we're skipping that. UA Sports Festival arc. That ends up happening, or no, not school sports, but school festival arc. You know, the part where Gentle busts in and he starts creating a ruckus and, kind of just becoming a huge pain in the hero's sides. Yeah, that happens. And in terms of what happens there, I'm thinking that Gentle just pretty much ends up arriving. I'm thinking he does get started with his evil plan, and people would start kind of showing him a bit of attention, but eventually Izuku would just shoot a lightning bolt, which nobody was able to see, right at Gentle, that knocks him out immediately. La Brava would be like, "No, Gentle!" And from here, All Might would just blitz behind them both before saying, "It appears that you found yourself at the wrong spot," before promptly throwing the both of them in jail this time. And then all of the rest of the events that you guys would pretty much see happening in canon would happen, which includes the joint battle training arc. This is season 5, I believe, when Deku, Uraraka, Mina, and Mineta were on a team against Shinso and the Class 1B rejects. So that ends up happening. They won in the original. Izuku is now way more overpowered and actually able to handle all 5 of them at the same time, which I'm just going to be sparing you guys the details. Izuku it's not funny. He genuinely just destroys them, dismantling them horribly. And eventually we end up making our way towards the arc where they have another internship, and this time Izuku doesn't end up going with Endeavor like he would have in the original, instead prompting to go back to Mirko. And eventually we end up jumping into what ends up being known as the World's Hero Mission. If you guys haven't seen the movie, trust me, it's awesome. Like, it's genuinely so good. The villain has the most OP quirk possible. He can reflect attacks off of him. That is just broken. But Izuku would end up having a way harder time than he did in canon, just because this time he ends up having to burst his electricity or voltage as high as he possibly can, to the point where it almost kills the villain because of how high the voltage turned out to get and how much power Izuku had to let out. This is possibly one of the only times that Izuku will ever get to go all out again. And essentially, this leads us to the ending of What If Izuku Had a Lightning Quirk. And why do I say ending? Well, it's just due to the fact that Izuku now essentially has no other villains to face. There's nothing else. I mean, let's be realistic. What else is going to happen? The main big bad threats that would have attacked him at UA don't exist no more. So now Izuku just has a normal UA career. He has his days go by like a normal student. There's no villain attacks. Izuku goes through the next 2 years of UA coursing through it and eventually goes on to become, you know it, the #1 hero, with Mirio becoming the second due to the fact that he ends up getting the torch of One for All handed down to him, and he ends up perishing at 30 years old. Because if you guys don't know this yet, if you have a quirk and you get One for All, you pretty much end up dying early. I'm not sure if it applies to everybody, but I'm pretty sure it would apply to Mirio. That said though, that marks the end. If you liked the video, make sure to slap the like down below and let me know what you guys thought about this new video format. I know that it was super quick paced, but I just want to try new things out, you know what I mean? I could definitely like make it longer, but if you want to see more of a kind of longer version of this, then go check out my What If Deku Had Thunder Breathing. I have 2 videos on that which you guys can check out, and each one of them is really dope. That said, I love each and every single one of you guys. It has been your boy Zether, and I am out. Peace.